Thank you very much. Specifically present, as I can see, Deputy General Secretary of the MPP, Mrs. Tiwudako, Directors of Parliament, members from the civic society, the media, ladies and gentlemen. Let me first thank the Clerk to Parliament for this initiative and for giving me the opportunity to do the needful as it may be lecture. Chairman, please permit me to make two important acknowledgements, as they are very essential because we have students in this auditorium. Back in 2012, as a young candidate in my constituency, he took the director of elections to train me and prepare me with his own manual on how to conduct my campaign and win election. I followed that tutorial notes as if he was a prophet. On the D-Day, the realities were that I had to go by the tutorial notes, and I won. Came to Parliament, he held my hand and never gave up on me, even in difficult times. And I'm honored that today, even in his tight schedule, he's here. Dr. Matthew Pokro, I'm grateful. And two, Gabi Asariochedako, who also never gave up on me as a young legislator and made sure I learned the rules on communication and studied hard, and he never hesitated to correct me, even when I got it wrong. I'm happy he's here. Not the least, our own student leader. He didn't promise me, but I heard that he would be here to listen to what his boy can do, Dr. Amin Adna. We were at class together. We were his boys. And he's here. He calls me his leader. I call him my boss. Colleagues, thank you for having time to be part of this important program titled Centrism, Formulating Policies for a Growing Democracy. We are in a house of a giant. On the 7th of January 1993, Ghana held its breath. A nation wearied by decades of coup, proscription, and broken promises stood at the fragile edge of a new democratic dawn. The air was heavy with doubts. The wounds of history were still fresh. Many wondered whether this latest experiment in constitutional rule would endure, or whether it would falter under the weight of mistrust and memory. Into that chamber stepped Justice Daniel Francis Anning. He lifted the speaker's gavel with calm, deliberate resolve. Before him sat a house alive with tension, suspicion, and untested loyalties. Around him stood a country, anxious yet hopeful. In that defining moment, he did not merely preside over proceedings, he steadied a republic. Today, I want to talk to you about centrism in the very auditorium named after him in his memory. I'm going to take you through what it is, where it comes from, and why it matters desperately for Ghana right now, and what happens to a nation when we abandon its principles in favor of extremes, slogans, and political theater. Let me thank the majority leader, Honorable Mahama Yariga, for doing the teaser. What he doesn't know is that I admire him so much. But also remind me that when the market dictates, the state must intervene. So the producer price of cocoa must never be reduced. The state should have intervened. Ladies and gentlemen, before we ascend to the heights of policy and philosophy, I need to bring you back down to earth. I need to introduce to you two women whose stories this nation has not yet found courage to truly hear. Somewhere in Ghana's north, in a village whose name you will not find on a tourist map, a girl was born. Let us call her by her rightful name, Fati. Fati grew up surrounded by the love that was rich and resources that were scarce. She watched her mother work the land. She watched her father dream of a better life. And somewhere in that red dusted courtyard, beneath a sky so wide and blue it had to look at, Fati made herself a quiet promise. I will go. I will find something better. I will make my family proud. And so, like thousands before her, Fati came to Accra. She came with a fire in her chest and hope in her hands. She believed, as our constitution promises, as our politicians swear at every rally, that Ghana is a land of opportunity. She believed the system would meet her halfway. It did not. Today, Fati is barely 17 years old, and already life has taken more than half that it has given her. She works as a kitchen assistant, a destitute, hard-laboring hand in one of Accra's watching kitchens. She wakes before the sun. She lifts and scrubs and carries and cleans in heat that will break a stronger spirit. She earns barely enough to survive. No safety net, no social protection, no pathway to a skill, a certificate, a life with dignity. And Fati is pregnant. Barely 17, carrying a new life in her womb. A child whose future she cannot afford to imagine, even as she refuses to stop praying for it. Is this a promise of our democracy? Is this what we meant when we said, quote, development in freedom? Hold Fati in your heart as we continue. Do not let her go. Because every policy we discuss today, every government we judge, we must judge it through her eyes. Now let me take you beyond our shores. For Ghana's pain does not stop at the water's edge. Picture a young Ghanaian mother. Her name, Faustina Yeli Fasil. We know her story, not because we stood by her side, not because we witnessed her final moments, but because in some quiet, unspoken corner of our hearts, we all feared becoming her. She looked at this country. She looked at her daughter. She weighed the cost of staying against the terror of the sea, and she chose the sea. She stepped onto the rickety, overcrowded vessel in the cold darkness, and she prayed that the Mediterranean would be merciful. It was not. The boat capsized. The cold water swallowed her whole. In her final moments, perhaps she thought of Ghana. Perhaps she thought of a little child. Perhaps she whispered a prayer that had no time to finish. She left behind her daughter, barely 4 years old, clinging to the wreckage in the great sea, rescued by strangers. Her photograph circled the globe as thousands searched desperately for her family, her roots, and her hope. To this day, I do not know if that child has been found. She drifts in some limbo between tragedy and testimony as a haunting question to every leader, every lawmaker, every citizen of this republic. What must we build so that no Ghanaian mother ever again feels that the sea is safer than her own country? two women, Fatih and the nameless mother in the Mediterranean, are not statistics. They are the heartbeat of why we are here today. Their white centrism is not merely a political philosophy. Justify the inner workings of Parliament, a sacred space where the will of the people is translated into laws that shape our shared. At a time when political discourse across the globe is increasingly defined by polarization, mistrust, and ideological rigidity, the call to reflect seriously on the role of the political center is both intellectually and politically urgent. Democracies today are not collapsing primarily because of external invasion. They are fraying from within. The tone of public debate has hardened. Compromise is calculated as betrayal. Moderation is misrepresented as weakness. Yet history teaches us that durable democratic progress has seldom been the product of extremes. It has more often been the achievement of those who could build bridges across differences. Every growing democracy eventually reaches a defining moment. The question shifts from whether democracy can survive to whether democracy can deliver. Our journey as a country. Ghana's Fourth Republic, established in 1992, has experienced consistent democratic governance marked by stability, constitutionalism, and institutional continuity. As you have been told already by the majority leader, power has alternated peacefully between the New Patriotic Party and the National Democratic Congress. Institutions have strengthened, parliamentary oversight has deepened, judicial independence has been tested and upheld. What is particularly instructive is that successive governments, regardless of party, have often found centrist ground on critical issues. We have pursued macroeconomic stability, fiscal discipline, inflation control, and debt sustainability when evidence demanded it, even when such policies were politically difficult. We have combined market-based economic management with social intervention programs. Private sector growth has been encouraged alongside significant public investment in education, health, and infrastructure. Fiscal discipline has coexisted with targeted support for vulnerable populations. These policy choices demonstrate that Ghana's democratic governance has not been driven by ideological extremes. Policy formulation has largely been guided by moderation, pragmatism, and national consensus. Now let's turn to the internal landscape, the center-left and the center-right. Indeed, Ghana's democratic governance is shaped by two prominent political ideologies, the center-left and the center-right. Each ideology represents a coherent government that invests in public services, promotes inclusive development, redistributes income through progressive policies, protect workers and consumers through regulation, and ensure that benefits of economic growth are broadly shared. The New Patriotic Party, the NPP, of which I'm proudly a member, on the other hand, traces its ideological foundation from the Dankwa Dongo Buzia tradition. The center-right in Ghana is associated with this political tradition. This political philosophy encapsulates individual liberty, private enterprise, limited government intervention, market-driven solutions. It prioritizes personal responsibility, protection of property rights, and economic efficiency, advocating for policies that encourage entrepreneurship, attract investment, and promote sustainable growth. Now let us try and understand centrism, its history, meaning, and foundations. The historical origins of centrism trace its roots to a familiar center-right ideological spectrum. In modern origins, to seating arrangement of the French National Assembly in 1789. Those who supported the monarchy sat to the right of the presiding officer. Those who favored radical reform sat to the left. From this historical accident grew one of the most durable organizing framework in modern politics. The left, broadly speaking, has historically championed equality, collective welfare, state intervention, and protection of marginalized groups. The right has historically prioritized individual liberty, free markets, tradition, and limited governance. Centrism emerged from the lived experience of societies that grappled with ideological extremes. History shows that rigid adherence to any single political doctrine often produce unintended consequences. Excessive state stifled initiative and efficiency, while unchecked market dominance deepen inequality and social exclusion. Over time, democratic systems learn that governance requires balance. Centrism, therefore, developed as a practical response to these lessons. It draws from multiple traditions, selected policies not because they fit a rigid ideological mold, but because they address real challenges effectively. Centrism is grounded in realism. It accepts complexity. It recognizes that society evolved and policies must evolve with them. Centrism is not the arithmetic midpoint between left and right. It is a distinct political tradition with its own philosophical commitments, its own internal debates, and its own evolving relationship with power. It draws selectively from both the left and the right, rejecting what it regards as the excesses of each, while synthesizing the most defensible element of both. Authentic centrism is anchored in three foundational pillars. The first is balance. This is a recognition of the competing values: liberty, equality, efficiency, fairness, individual rights, and collective responsibilities, and that they must be held in tension rather than resolved by the triumph of one over the other. As Aristotle taught in his concept of the, quote, golden mean, end quote, virtues lies not in excess, but in equilibrium. The second pillar is evidence. Centrism grounds public policy in research, data, and measurable outcomes rather than ideological loyalty. Centrist policy makers ask not, does this fit my doctrine? But they ask, what works best in this context at this time for the greatest number of people? Third, the pillar is inclusion. Centrism ensures that diverse voices shape the national conversation and that solutions expand the circle of benefit rather than reward one group at the expense of another. Centrism is disciplined governance. It is intellectual humility to recognize that no single political tradition possesses a monopoly on wisdom. It is a moral resolve to place national interest above partisan gain. Extremes may excite, but balance builds a nation. What unites the center-left and the center-right, Honorable Chairman, I beg to submit, despite these differences, is a shared commitment to constitutional rule, electoral legitimacy, the rejection of political violence, the protection of civil liberties, and the defense of pluralism. It is the shared foundation, more than any specific policy position, that defines the centrist tradition and distinguishes it from the illiberal extremes on both sides. As third Deputy Speaker of ECOWAS Parliament, I have seen firsthand the consequences when these shared commitments erode. In part of West Africa, unconstitutional changes of government have disrupted democratic trajectories. Military interventions, often justified as corrective measures, ultimately undermine long-term institutional development. The center must therefore serve as the guardian of constitutional continuity. I must submit that the center-left and the center-right have their limits as ideologies. While ideology offers guidance, rigid adherence to it can become a constraint, especially in a growing democracy. Societies are complex. Economic conditions change. Social needs evolve. External shocks such as global economic downturns, public health crisis, or supply chain disruptions demand flexible responses. In such circumstances, policies driven purely by ideological loyalty risk becoming disconnected from reality. A center-left approach, if pursued without moderation, may place unsustainable pressure on public finances. A center-right approach, if applied rigidly, may widen inequality or weaken social cohesion. This is where the limits of ideology become apparent. Effective policy making requires more than philosophical consistency. It requires judgment, balance, and responsiveness to context. Why centrism matter in Ghana? Honorable Chairman, colleagues in leadership, members of parliament here present, ladies and gentlemen, I submit that as a growing democracy, the stakes could not be higher. We face complex challenges: youth unemployment, climate vulnerability, digital transformation, ECOWAS integration, and global economic volatility. No single ideology holds all the solutions. Centrism encourages innovation. It blends market incentives with social investments, private initiative with public oversight, growth with equity. A growing democracy like ours must guard against two dangers. The first is ideological rigidity, which paralyzes decision-making. The second is opportunistic populism, which sacrifices long-term national interests for short-term applause. Centrism charts a disciplined course between these two extremes. Now, the role of Parliament in a centrist policy-making democracy. Ladies and gentlemen, in every constitutional democracy influenced by the Westminster tradition like ours, Parliament occupies a unique space.
Further, the relationship between Parliament and the public. Since the A Parliament, the Speaker and the leadership of Parliament has made it a point that indeed Parliament belongs to the public, and therefore nothing must be done here that should be hidden from the public. And as such, 3 departments have been created just to enhance our relationship with the public. We have a Department of Public Engagement, we have Media Relations, and we have a Department of Broadcasting. These 3 departments have been created, as I said, so that Parliament can be made known to the public. I believe if we've been monitoring Parliament,
I really enjoyed it.
I'll arrange, I think,